Hey, welcome to the Razzle Dazzle Show, a podcast where we talk about our favorite video games and all things pop culture with an emphasis on our favorites. I'm your host, Jared, and our guest today is Neil Ross. Neil Ross started out as a disc jockey working on radio stations in Honolulu, San Diego, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. He made the transition to voiceovers in the early 80s and worked on some of the classic animation shows of the era, including Transformers, G.I. Joe, Spider-Man the Animated Series, and Voltron, Defender of the Universe. Some of Neil's other career highlights include narrating 22 episodes of the PBS science series Nova and announcing the Academy Awards and the Primetime Emmy Awards. For 7 years, he was the announcer of the AFI Life Achievement Awards telecast, and he was the announcer on the game show Press Your Luck for 4 seasons on ABC. His voice work has also been featured in many live-action motion pictures, including Back to the Future 2, Dick Tracy, Being John Malkovich, and The Interpreter. He's done voice work on numerous games such as Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, Metal Gear Solid, Call of Duty, Command & Conquer, and Doom 3. Please let us know what you think about this episode somewhere on the internet, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at Razzle Dazzle Show, on TikTok at Razzle_Dazzle_Show, on Blue Sky at Raz-Show-Pod, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Raz_Daz_Pod. And with all that being said,
it's Razzle Dazzle time!
Hey Neil, thank you for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm good, Jared. How about yourself?
Like I said before we started, if I was doing any better, I'd have to hire somebody to help me enjoy it. Thank you for asking.
There you go. Enjoy it while you can.
Quick Kickstarter question I would love to ask you is, do you still have the original equipment from running KROSS?
No, sadly, all of that stuff is probably sitting in some landfill somewhere. I left home at 17, and I didn't take any of that stuff with me. I don't know what happened to it, to be honest with you.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah, it's funny. You think you remember everything, and then I go back over that period, and you ask, like, what happened to that stuff, and I have no idea. I must have given it away, or I don't know.
Right.
But you're referring to the little home radio station I put together when I was a teenager so that I could practice being a disc jockey, which convinced my father, if he wasn't already convinced of it, that his son was a mental case.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm referring to. And you go over just about every aspect of your life in your book, Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers, which, again, I must say it's a fantastic read as someone who works in the radio industry. Again, I work in public media, so NPR, PBS, not exactly the kind of radio you were listening to and then ended up working on, but still it gave so much insight into the industry that I absolutely love looking forward to. And of course, you talking about Transformers, G.I. Joe, Voltron, right, which is a big part of this show, and then getting to learn everything else after that point with being on Nova and stuff. I have Nova 50 Eclipse glasses right here. They were very popular here when the eclipse happened, and so much more, video games, live action movies. But let's start in the beginning. To the listeners at home, I highly implore you to go check out Neil Ross's book, Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers. You can find it at neilbook.com. And you can also find it on Amazon, Audible, Kindle, all those good places. And we'll talk about it more later. But first, Neil, if you can tell us where you grew up and how would you describe the musical background of your childhood?
Yes, I grew up my formative years in Montreal, Canada. I was originally born in London, England, but we left when I was 2, and I lived in Montreal from roughly 2 to the age of 11, I think, almost 12. Mm-hmm. As far as musical influences, as I mentioned in the book, I really didn't like the music that I heard on the radio when I was growing up. This would have been in the 50s, the pre-rock and roll days of the 50s. And I listened to my radio quite a bit. But I would tune out all the music shows and just listen for talk shows, even if I couldn't understand what people were saying or what the topic was about. But I found myself becoming fascinated with all the different voices and accents that I heard coming out of that radio, and I began to try to reproduce some of those in the privacy of my bedroom. Yeah, little thinking that someday that would lead me to a whole wonderful career, but it ultimately did. But anyway, it was not until I chanced to hear a record by an artist called Little Richard and a song called Tutti Frutti, and I'd never heard anything like that before in my life. And it just electrified me from the tips of my toes to the hair on my head. It was like I was suddenly filled with this feeling of joy and electricity, and it's hard to describe. I just remember thinking as it ended, my God, somebody finally got it right. I've been waiting my whole life to hear something like this. And then, of course, I discovered that there's this new thing called rock and roll. And it caused me to start listening to music radio for the first time. And of course, it was the type of radio where they were playing what was known as the top 40. Not all of the records in the top 40 were rock and roll, but it was kind of rock based. And that led to my interest in radio and getting involved in radio. It's hard to describe now. If you can imagine a world with no internet, no smartphones. If you got a phone at all, it's a black one with a rotary dial, and your dad won't let you use it. And and the one thing as a teenager that you've got that is absolutely yours, and they can't take it away from you. Well, I guess they could, confiscate your radio, but basically it's your thing, and that was our music, the rock and roll music, and the DJs who played it. They were sort of the influencers of that time period. Right. Now that you go online and you look at somebody who tells you what clothes to wear.
Everybody's reviewing everything.
Yeah, the disc jockey was probably the closest thing to that we had. And some of these guys were as famous as in their respective cities, as famous as the president or anybody else that you might hear about.
Right.
At least to us, they were. Because they were the conduits to the music. There was no other way to get to it. And I wanted to be a part of that. And that's what led me to start out, at least in my career, as a radio disc jockey.
Did you have any instruments growing up in your household?
Musical instruments, no. I was in the school orchestra briefly. They assigned me a violin, which didn't exactly fire my rocket, but I did learn a little bit about playing the violin, but we left and I never did that again. So no, there's, I sometimes think if I could live an alternate life, come back as somebody else and live a completely different life, I would like to have some musical talent and be a musician, but I have no discernible musical talent, so that's out of the question.
Well, I mean,
so I got as close to the music as I could. I played the records on radio,
Yeah, but you also had roles in Thumbelina. I'm pretty sure you had a few numbers. I remember watching that like 2 years ago, and I thought it was great for the first time.
Yeah, I did. I don't know if it was, I get the two of them mixed up. It was either
like
Thumbelina or Troll Prince in Central Park, but I got booked to do a session, and I showed up, and they said, you're going to sing some songs. And I was like, oy vey, I never claimed to be a singer. And then, fortunately, there were two other people with me. It wasn't just me. We were a trio, and the late Will Ryan and somebody else. I forget who the third person was. I think it was a woman, but I can't remember who. Anyway, and then we look into the control booth, and the person who's going to direct our singing is Barry Manilow, of all people. And I thought, I'm really in serious, deep doo-doo here. But somehow I got through it, and at no point did Barry Manilow say, you, the guy in the middle, just don't sing.
Yeah.
Let's just let the other two do it. No, so somehow I got through that, but it was, I was sweating bullets, I'll tell you.
Yeah, and in Thumbelina, you played Mr. Bear and Mr. Fox, and The Troll in Central Park, you played Pansy. I can only say from Thumbelina, because I haven't watched the other one, that I think you've had a great performance. Did you ever get around to watching it? I know you said in the book that you didn't.
No. The only one that I did all those with a fellow named Don Bluth, who you may be familiar with. And the only Don Bluth movie that I participated in that I have actually seen is American Tail.
Gotcha.
And I've seen that actually multiple times because he used to bring us in and show us sort of rough cuts
Right.
before he got it finished. So I'm quite familiar with that movie, but the others I never got around to seeing. I'm not a big fan of Me. I enjoy the work, but I don't necessarily want. The only time I want to see the finished product is if I'm curious.
Right.
What does my character look like, actually? And then I'll take a look.
Right.
But to just sit there and listen to myself, it's no. I'd rather listen to somebody else.
I totally understand. Do you remember the first physical music you've owned that was yours? Like a record, a cassette?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. The first record I actually spent money on. It's funny, I was a huge Little Richard fan, and then Elvis. I was a big fan of Elvis.
Yeah.
But the first record, nobody listening will have even heard of this thing, but it was called Love is Strange by Mickey and Sylvia. And they were a male-female team. They were black, and I think they were trying to be the black Art and Dottie Todd. It was basically, guy-girl combo, and the guy plays guitar. Or like...
Mac?
I'm forgetting. Les Paul and Mary Ford, for instance, would be another example. Les Paul, I'm sure you've heard of, famous inventor and brilliant musician. Well, he was one of the original multi-track guys. So he would record his wife and do multiple layers of her voice, so she actually sounded like a group, and then he'd be playing the guitar. Anyway, Mickey and Sylvia, they were trying to be the black version of that. And it wasn't the lyrics or the song, or it was the damn guitar solo. And it's worth listening to if you want to jump on YouTube or something. Love is Strange by Mickey and Sylvia. Listen to that. Boy, that guitar. I'd never heard anything like that before. And I really wouldn't hear anything like that again until Link Wray came out with Rumble. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I have not.
It was an instrumental. And again, he was an early multi-track guy. And a rumble in those days meant a gang fight. Teenagers, switchblade knives and chains and all kinds of horrible stuff in alleys, and no guns, but pretty much everything else. And as I say, this was an instrumental. There were no lyrics, but the record was banned because it just sounded so damn evil that they said, this will get the kids riled up. We can't play this.
Interesting.
And supposedly, Pete Townsend of The Who has basically said it's this simple: no rumble, no Who. He heard that and said, I got to get into this somehow. And of course, he, having some musical talent, did. That's worth looking up too. Rumble by Link Wray. That guitar, boom, 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 ba, 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 ba. You didn't hear stuff like that. In those days, the guitar was kind of ding-ling, ding-ling thing going on. But these guys, it was like that Link Wray and Rumble that was probably the first power chords I ever heard, and it was just astonishing.
That's interesting. I like that you mentioned the Who, because it's a segue to my next question, kind of. I'm on this other show called 3 Song Stories, where we tell people's biography through music. Each guest picks out or thinks of 3 songs that they have a story associated with, where it could either be like super close to their heart, or just like something funny, or like something serious, whatever. And a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, we had, I don't remember his name, I don't remember what he was or is, but he was extremely associated with The Who. He might have been like part of the press or something, or maybe what's it called, a roadie or something. I don't remember, but I remember his story of saying that like he's a collector, so he has the drum circle or whatever it's called from The Who, from one of their concerts, that Keith just like ripped out and threw into the audience, and he has that, and he has a lot of other Who memorabilia that is now like in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and stuff. It's really cool. But anyways, I mentioned 3 Song Stories, and I want to ask you if you have a song story that you can share from the top of your head.
Well, gosh, I mean, almost all
Yeah, I'm sure it's
all these trigger one memory or another. Usually, it's what studio I was in when I was playing them on the radio. I do remember there's a song that you don't hear very often. It's called "A Summer Song" by Chad and Jeremy. And that song was just starting to peak when I went from the snowy cold of Lewiston, Idaho, to the beaches of Honolulu, Hawaii in 1964. And every time I hear that song, I'm back in Waikiki in the Waikiki Biltmore Hotel, where the studios were, overlooking the pool.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a story really, but it's that's what happens to me with certain songs. I'm right back there. Another great one is "You're Gonna Miss Me" by the 13th Floor Elevators. You ever heard of that one?
I have not.
That's worth tracking down, and that reminds me of a romance that ended badly.
Aw.
But I like to think she missed me.
Understood. How do those songs fit into your life today?
How do they fit? I just find myself listening to them periodically.
Yeah.
I'll just suddenly, I want to hear "Love is Strange" again. I want to hear that damn guitar one more time. And so I'll, call it up on YouTube or whatever and give it a listen.
What pops into your mind first when I ask you to reach back for an early memory that has a particular show or movie associated with?
Well, of course, I think about watching on television when I could talk my old man into letting me do it. This is, again, younger people, what? But you have no internet, you have no computer, you have no smartphone. There's one TV in the house, it's in the living room, and your dad decides what the family's going to watch, sometimes your mom. And he's in there reading some stupid magazine, and Can I
look at TV a little bit?
All right, don't disturb me. So I'd have to crouch in front of the thing with a speaker at a very low volume. And then he'd make acerbic comments about what I was watching. But I remember watching Rawhide.
Rawhide, wow.
And spotting a very young, unknown Clint Eastwood and going, boy, who's that? Wow. And then I remember not too many years later, now that I think about it, I wander into a theater in Honolulu in 1960. When would this have been? I don't know, 65, 66. And they're showing this spaghetti Western, and Clint Eastwood is in it. And I said, I wonder what he's doing. That's interesting. Walked in and I saw A Fistful of Dollars, and it just absolutely blew me away. That was my introduction to spaghetti Westerns. Oh, and the other one, of course, would be the first film noir I ever saw. And you won't be familiar with this at all, I'm sure, but it's called The Big Sleep with Humphrey Bogart, based on the book by the writer Raymond Chandler. And I saw that at the age of about 13, 14, and I'd just never seen anything like it before in my life. Because I was growing up in the 50s where all the leading men were tall and handsome, and suddenly the lead in this is this guy who has kind of a funny speech pattern, and he's not that good looking, but for some damn reason you can't take your eyes off him. What's he going to do next? And this the whole mood of the thing in glorious black and white, which... I don't know if you've seen it yet. The new Ripley on Netflix.
I have not.
It's a sort of a riff on the talented Mr. Ripley. Mm-hmm. It's basically the same story. Well, the whole thing is shot in black and white, and I had forgotten what kind of a mood black and white can evoke. Mm-hmm. It's a shame that we threw it away, and not everything needs to be in color. If you're going for a certain kind of mood, sometimes black and white is unbeatable. I highly recommend this Ripley. It's astonishingly good.
I'll definitely check it out. Is there a show or song or movie or whatever that has helped you get through a difficult time in your life? And you don't have to go into detail and share the story. Well,
the only thing that's popping into my mind is that children's record that I heard. I reference it at the end of the book, where basically the moral of the story was, it isn't what you've got, it's what you do with what you've got.
Yeah.
And the longer I'm around, the more I realize how absolutely true that is. I have known people in my life who were far more gifted and talented and handsome and charming than I could ever hope to be. And because they had no interest in really working, let's say, they ended up ultimately going nowhere. All that talent and charm, without work, without application, you go nowhere.
Right. You
You
can't
may
be.
get somewhere briefly, but it won't last. The people that last are the people that just get in the trenches and work. And if you've got even a little tiny bit of talent, if you work hard enough, you break through. And that's all that comes to mind.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So, working in different cities must have exposed you to a diverse audience and music scenes. How did each location influence your broadcasting style and/or musical taste?
Well, actually, I didn't go that many places. Started out, did a year in Salt Lake City, Utah. I did a few months in Idaho. Then I went to Honolulu. Honolulu is interesting. The population, the non-Caucasian population over there, that is the term they were using when I was over there, which was a long time ago. They would just be called locals. And this was not a pejorative. It was just, we were the Howleys and they were the locals. And they loved soft soul music. I was just thinking about it the other day. There's a record called Talk to Me by Sonny and the Sunglows, I think, which is a band out of Texas. They kind of had Chicano roots, I think. Tejano music blended with pop and rock. And they loved that song in Hawaii when I was over there. I mean, if you popped open the request lines, almost one of the first records can you play Talk to Me by Sonny and the Sunglows? Okay, we'll get it on for you, partner. They were very unique in that. Any kind of soft soul, they just loved it. And but other than that, it seems like San Diego, San Francisco, L.A. Those were the only other places I worked, and they're all pretty much the same.
Right.
I think.
Radio often involves thinking on your feet, of course, and adapting to unexpected situations, especially when you're live constantly. Can you recall a moment from your radio career that challenged you in this way?
Oh, it was all kind of a challenge. I describe. To my way of thinking, it's a slow motion juggling act. You get a record on, okay, now you got to figure out what comes next. Am I going to play another record? Am I going to start playing some commercials? Maybe I need to play some commercials. All right, I got to get the cartridge out of the rack, make sure it's the right one, put it in the machine. Now how much time do I have left? Oh, I better get the next record ready, and I'm queuing that. In those days, we had to physically cue them up. Like you've seen these guys with the scratching.
Yep.
It was not unlike that. That's how a DJ in those days, when we played records, could say, "Here's the Beatles," bang, and they'd come on. You drop the needle on it, turn the pot down to the cue area, which allowed you to hear it, but not the audience. And then you'd let it spin around until it started, and then you'd pull it back a quarter turn, right? Now you could either slip cue it. In other words, hold your finger on it and go, "Here's the Beatles," and lift your finger and bang, they came. Or you could just flip the switch. But of course, different turntables had different starting speeds. Some of them didn't get up to speed in a quarter turn, so you'd have to pull it a little further. I mean, it was a whole mishigas.
Yeah.
Which now they just hit a button, if they even do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, now wait, this song is ending. Now I got to think of something to say, and then how do I get into this first commercial? And then do I have a live commercial to read? I got to find that, and and you do that, especially weekends. Weekends were the worst because you usually got assigned a 6-hour shift, and 6 hours of that, you walk out of there, you're tired.
I bet.
You're not physically. It's not.
No, of course not. You're just mentally exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. In
In
those days, it was a 6-day week. You did your normal show Monday through Friday, and then the 6th day you did 6 hours. Well, the 7th day you're just lying on the couch.
Yeah.
And your girlfriend's going,
Why don't we ever do anything?
"I'm tired."
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you mean.
Skiing.
It's not good.
I understand what you mean to an extent. It's not the same, but this past week here at the station, we had our pledge drive. And for every day, all 5 days, I would start from like 11 and end till like 4, going live on the air every like 5-10 minutes, pitching for like another 4 minutes, and then repeating over and over and over again for the entire time. And I'm, running the board. I have to, make sure everybody knows what time we're going on, what time we're going off. You know how it is. And it's not as, I think the right word is complicated as what you would have done, but I do understand what you mean by like going live on radio every so often for an extended period of time. Yeah, it's draining.
Yeah, and if you get distracted and you drop the ball, then suddenly there's dead air and
yeah,
and the phones are ringing and people are yelling and it's not
what's going on? Why are we off the air? It's fine. Oh man. So as a DJ, you had the opportunity to introduce listeners to new music. Are there any songs or artists that you remember being particularly excited to share with your audience?
Well, of course, when the Beatles came along, they were just so huge. And I remember when a new Beatle record would come in the station, and of course you want to be on the air with it as soon as possible. Exclusive, only here on K-Blow will you hear the new Beatles song. But no, we would take it in the production studio. We're going to hear it first. Then they get to hear it.
Yeah.
We're going to hear it now. The first time, just us. And on it would come. And it was a curious phenomenon with the Beatles. I would hear their new song and I'd go, that's great. Boy, that reminds me of something, though. I wonder if they're going to get sued. Did they steal that melody? It sounds so familiar. And of course, it did happen in the case of George Harrison years later. But in my opinion, what Lennon and McCartney were able to do, and I think it's because of the fact that they steeped themselves in popular music. They were able to write songs that had an almost instant familiarity. In other words, you would hear it as you were hearing it. You'd go, I've heard this before. You really hadn't, but they had somehow created a melody that was so catchy, you felt like you'd heard it before, and you only needed to hear it once and you could hum it.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like how hip-hop artists in the 90s and, of course, everybody now samples other musicians' music.
Well, I mean, there's only 12 notes. And I don't know how many keys, I mean...
So in so many ways you can spin it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was some kind of a court case. I don't know. I probably shouldn't get into this because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about to begin with. But one of the new singers testified. Can't think of the guy's name. Maybe it'll come to me. But apparently he got up in the witness stand. He had a guitar with him. And he said, now here are 4 or 5 hit records. You all know them. And they all involve they just involve 4 chords. A, E, and whatever the hell the other 2 were.
Yeah.
And he says, here, I'll sing them for you. I am only playing these same 4 chords. And he did. And then he said, folks, if you say you can copyright transitioning from A to E, we're screwed. We can't write any more music. There's only 12 notes, folks. And I thought he's got a point. It's, some of the what was I know, the case where, oh gosh, here I'm getting into other stuff I haven't thought out before, but the Boy George got sued over
Karma, chameleon.
Right, yeah.
And they said he had ripped that off from Jimmy Jones' Handyman, which I remember it because I'm old, but he just said, karma. It was a similar thing.
Right.
But I never made that connection, but apparently that they won that case. And again, go on. You're probably familiar with Karma Chameleon, but go and listen to Handyman by Jimmy Jones. I'm sure it's on YouTube. And you go, oh, yeah, I see. Okay. But is that really a ripoff? And in these juries, God bless them, most of them don't know anything about music. and they're asked to decide, is this a ripoff or not? And
Right.
To me, you should have a jury of musicians.
Not just random people.
I mean, a jury of your peers. Well, if you're a musician, you should have a bunch of musicians in the jury, and they go, you stole that, or they go, no, it's close, but come on. You know.
Yeah. To move on, radio personalities often develop a unique persona or on-air identity. Can you give us some insight to yours, where you came up with it? How has it changed through the years of being a disc jockey?
I never really did. I thought about it later, and I thought, you dummy. Because then years later, I got into the voiceover business. I started doing cartoons, and I said, you should have created just some kind of outrageous character and played that on radio. You'd have been a huge success. I just tried to be some sort of a version of me.
Yeah.
And, it went okay. I really did not have that great a career, to be honest with you. Thank God for voiceovers. I'm very happy with what happened in that. But I look back on my radio career, and it seems like just a lot of frustration and near misses. But a perfect example of what I'm talking about is somebody like Wolfman Jack.
Yep.
Now, he had to create a persona when he was out in public. Hey, baby, how you doing? But I guarantee he didn't sound like that if he was just in his living room, He'd say, put on the TV. But he created this. I mean, I can't tell you what it was like the first time I heard him, especially since he was on this station coming out of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And you hear this guy, hey, baby, it's Wolfman. And you go, what the hell am I? It was very compelling. He was a sharp cookie. It's just, sadly, I read his biography. He never made any money, unfortunately. But he sure created an unforgettable character. And I could have done something like that. It just didn't occur to me to do it.
But I think it means more, or I think it's more sincere that it's just, it's you. You're the one doing it. Maybe there's a more personal level between you and the audience. I tried surfing the web and trying to find like any clips of you on the radio back then. I couldn't find anything, but I wish I did.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Oh. They're out there, but I'm not going to tell you how to get to them.
Understood.
I prefer let sleeping air checks die.
Yep, got it.
No.
So radio has evolved significantly over the years, of course, especially with the rise of digital and streaming platforms. How do you think your experience in radio has influenced your approach to voice acting and other aspects of your career?
Well, of course, what I had to do to get into voiceovers was pretty much unlearn everything that I had learned in radio.
Just like what Yoda teaches.
Yeah. Well, some of the things that were a strength in radio were tended to be a liability in voiceovers. But the one thing that I did learn that has always stood me in good stead, and I was advised to do this by a radio guy that I met before I got into the business. And of course, in those days, when I started out, there was a lot more live copy than there. In fact, there's no live copy anymore, hardly. Mm-hmm. But in those days, a lot of the commercials were done live by the DJ. And in smaller stations, you had to do your own newscasts. You'd put a record on and run down the hall to the UPI machine, rip a 5-minute summary off, run back in the studio. By this time, the record is tailing out and it's news time. And the news you're reading is as much a shock to you as it is the audience because you haven't had a chance to look at it beforehand. So his advice to me was learn how to sight read, get really good at that. And so that's part of what I did when I was in my little pretend radio studio in the garage. I would read aloud from newspapers and magazines, and I got pretty good at that. And so when I was dealing with a piece of copy, I could just sort of maybe use 5% of my concentration on actually looking at the word and getting it out of my mouth. And that allowed me to put 95% of my concentration in how am I going to do this?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that helped. But radio, you're sort of encouraged to develop
this very synthetic read, which has... you don't make any mistakes. You just sound really professional, just like a regular radio guy.
But you have no believability. Mm-hmm. And of course, the advertising agencies, that's the last thing they wanted. when they hired a voiceover
They want it
artist.
to be real, right?
Well, it varied, but they sure as hell didn't want somebody who sounded like, quote unquote, an announcer.
Right.
In fact, a lot of the copy that we would read, it would say, we're looking for a guy, a short, tall, fat, thin, happy, sad guy, not an announcer. And of course, my original read when I got to Los Angeles just screamed announcer because that's what I'd been. So I had to go and unlearn that and relearn how to read a piece of copy and not sound like an announcer. And that was the biggest challenge. So some of what I'd done in radio helped and some didn't.
Did you ever have to do ADR when working in voiceovers? Like, matching up? Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
I've done a little
you talked
bit of
about
that.
it. Yeah.
Not a whole lot, but I've done a little bit.
Yeah. I would assume the sight reading helped a lot with that.
Yeah, it's weird. You kind of have to look at the copy with one eye and look at the screen with the other. They sort of help you get started. I don't know if most people are aware, it's basically you're dubbing somebody's voice, and they give you headphones, and there are 3 beeps that you hear, and you go on the imaginary 4th beep. So it would be beep, 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 talk. And that imaginary 4th beat is when the character on the screen, when their lips begin to move. So they help you get in, but once you're in, if the person that you are dubbing perhaps is doing an Italian movie and pauses here and there, then you have to somehow try to match that. And it was really difficult. It's gotten a lot easier now that they have the digital equipment.
Yeah.
My daughter's been doing a fair amount of this stuff, and she says a lot of times she go, I'm sorry, I screwed that up. Let's go. No, we can fix it. Hang on. And they'll do some magic in the booth, and it's fine. It worked.
Yeah.
But back in the good old days, you had to nail it. And if you didn't, rewind and try it again.
Right.
Good dubbers are, in the old days, they were, my hat's off to them. I was never that good.
Yeah.
And while you're matching their lips, you got to act.
Right.
Talking about spaghetti westerns, the villain in Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More was played by an Italian actor. Jean Maria Volonte, I believe is how it's pronounced. But his voice was dubbed by an American, I've forgotten his name, but that wonderful deep voice that he had. That's not him. That's some guy from the Bronx. Bernie somebody.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you watch those movies, he did a superb job, this Bernie. I mean, you really believe that voice is coming out of that guy's mouth, and it's not.
Right. A little fun fact, as of recording, you are the second Canadian voice actor that we've had on the show, the other being Gary Chalk, who is best known for voicing Optimus Primal and Optimus Prime in Transformers, of course. And we talked a lot about ADR and stuff like that, and how like he had to do that with Beast Wars or not Beast Wars. He had to do that with like the other Transformer series he did as Prime and stuff like that. So, and
well, of course, Voltron was all ADR, but not really.
I love the insights you provided to how Voltron worked behind the scenes in your book. It's fascinating.
I don't know if you want to get into it now. I should point out I'm an ex-Canadian. I became a loyal American citizen at the age of 18.
Yeah, no, let's move on. Let's continue on with your voiceover career. Of course, you voiced numerous iconic characters, including Keith in Voltron. What was it like working on this beloved show? And do you have any other memorable moments from the recording booth?
Well, that was the first really big series that I landed, and I was essentially playing the lead character, so that was a very exciting time for me. However, it was not a typical cartoon session in that we were we were essentially dubbing an already existing show. The people who put this together bought 3 shows that were running in Japan and mashed them up. But they actually ended up not using one of the 3.
Yeah.
The other 2, they mashed them up and created Voltron from that footage. But we essentially, you would come in and you would have a line of dialogue, and then to the right of it was a number, let's say 5.3. And that meant that you had to do the line in 5.3 seconds because that would fit the character's lip flap. And so, you might do a wonderful job acting-wise, but it's a little too long. And you do it again, and it's a little too short. And then you try it again, and it's a little too long. And some of the shorter lines weren't that tough, but some stuff, maybe 20 seconds or more. And man, trying to act and hit a particular time was very difficult. And of course, because we were doing it that way, they couldn't work us as a full cast. We came in separately. So the only time I would see my fellow cast members was as I was leaving and they were coming in, or vice versa. Hi, how you doing? And we almost never worked together at all.
Huh.
So that was very different from the way most of the shows were done, because in most animation, the first thing that happens after a script is written is the voices are recorded.
Right.
Then the animators go to work and they work off of the voice tracks. But in this case, we were doing it backwards. The visuals already existed. Now we had to put the sound on them. It was, but as I say, it was very exciting for me because it was the first really big show that I got into on a regular basis. And no, very, very fond memories of Voltron.
Yeah, like you said earlier, Voltron is has a very niche community, but it's gone to, like, the original show is now a cult classic. So if you meet someone who knows Voltron, you're like, you automatically know that this guy knows what's up. And of course, there's not necessarily a reboot, but the continuation of Voltron Legendary Defender on Netflix, which is a phenomenal show. Like I said, it's how I got into it initially, and then led me to your work in the original, which again, stellar, pun intended, since it's in space.
Yes, got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
And not only did you get to voice the leader of Voltron, which of course is a very big deal, you also got to voice Pidge, the left arm of Voltron. The story of how you came up with the voice for Pidge, and even just getting the role for Pidge, is pretty infamous from all the research I've read and done on you. But would you mind telling that story?
No, not at all. Again, this was very early in my animation career, and I've in many ways for the first few years felt like an imposter and kept waiting for somebody to say, this person isn't an actor. He's some ex-disc jockey who got in here somehow. Get rid of him. So I show up thinking all I'm going to do is play Keith. And the director shoved a drawing under my nose and said, what do you got for this guy? And I see what looks like an elf with glasses and floundering around in a state of total panic, hoping he doesn't figure out what an amateur I am.
I suddenly started to do something like this.
And he said, okay, that's great. And I thought, this is a one-off. He'll be in one episode and then I won't have to deal with it anymore. Come to find out, he's a regular cast member and he's in 120 some odd episodes.
Yeah.
And now I'm stuck with this voice and I gotta do it.
Supposedly at the office where they edited all this stuff, everybody was talking like Pidge. And he said, the funny thing is they're all convinced they can do it better than you.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm the prototype. How can they be better than me? That's just not logical.
Well, I love Pidge. Green is my favorite color. So I usually you'll think if a team that's coordinated, colored based, you would go say like your favorite color is your favorite character, but that's not the case with Voltron for me. I'm a lefty. Pidge in the green line is Voltron's left hand, left arm. So again, you would think that will be enough for me to be like, that's who I'm associated with. Not the case for the original. It's really Keith, because I've had this background of leadership being taught to me. I was in the Army JROTC program for 4 years. I graduated as a captain, and Sergeant Mike, my AI, my Army instructor, he really played a vital role in my life, and a real role model, and taught me all about becoming a leader. He got me out of my shell and stuff like that. I was a very shy, introverted kid in middle school, but after this program, I grew into myself, and now I'm able to create, lead, and produce this whole show, which again, Voltron is heavily inspired by, or the show is inspired by Voltron, excuse me. So I usually tend to gravitate towards the leader characters in a lot of the things I watch. So Optimus Prime, Leonardo from the Ninja Turtles, Keith from Voltron. It's watching Keith lead Voltron in the various and also loony ways because of the nature of the show back then. Still formulated and still impacted me in a way where I'm like, Keith is always the level-headed leader of the group. He always knows how to make the right decisions or the best decisions, or he knows what to do in a heated situation, and I strive to be like that. I want to take this time and thank you for being one of my role models growing up.
Oh, well, you're more than welcome. That was not my intention. I was just trying to make a living, but I'm glad it worked out. No, I must tell you, we do a lot of conventions these days. And the number of people who come up to me, and or not just to me, but to all the various other voice actors that I know, and talk to us specifically about Voltron, G.I. Joe, and Transformers, and how much they learned from those shows.
Yeah.
In some cases, people have told us I came from a horrible family situation, and just about the only moral instruction I ever got as a kid were those public service announcements in G.I. Joe, like,
Don't steal any bicycles, kids.
this kind of thing. And it's really quite touching. And we had no idea of the influence that we had. I'm sure the fellas and gals who wrote it, I don't know if they had any of that in mind, but even if we did it inadvertently, I think we did help some people, and
Definitely.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. I know the majority of these shows, especially in the 80s, is to sell toys. Like in the overview, that's the purpose of these shows. I understand that, but the amazing side effect is the influences you and your peers have had in probably 2 or 3 generations. Because I'm young. I'm just almost in my mid-20s, and I'm talking about a show from the 80s.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say you were not exactly in our target age group, young man. You should be somewhere between 40 and 50 at this point if you're a Voltron fan, but.
Yeah, but even people older than me, from the Spider-Man the Animated Series podcast and Batman the Animated Series podcast, Alex and Will Robson, who you've been a guest on their show, which I just listened to the episode today, by the way. I've also had them on the show too, and they're amazing. And them telling you about how much your Green Goblin, your Norman Osborn means to them. I just actually started watching Spider-Man the Animated Series because of you to prepare for this episode this weekend. And I get it. The performance you give when even if it's just Norman in the first 2 seasons or whatever, it's foundational, I guess. Like Alex said, whenever he reads the Green Goblin and Norman Osborn, your voice is the voice of those characters, just like Mark Hamill, who you've also worked with on the same show, is the voice of the Joker, and Kevin Conroy is Batman, for example. It's crazy how these little kid shows or these little shows, these cartoons, just blow up into a phenomenon, and still going on even to this day.
Well, that's what I have said on many another occasion. At the time, these shows were vilified as being nothing more than half-hour-long toy commercials.
Yeah.
But I would posit that if that's all they were, how does one explain the fact that what is it now? Almost 40 years later, people are still watching them, still enjoying them,
Yeah.
still revere them, come to conventions to celebrate them.
Yeah.
It's absolutely astonishing. And so obviously, somehow or other, we did more than just half-hour-long toy commercials.
Yeah, definitely. And Transformers celebrating their 40th anniversary this year. I'm sure a lot of other shows have been celebrating the 40th, and it's crazy how far it's come, and that you're still remembered, and you hold a special place in hundreds upon thousands of people's lives, and it's beautiful. So again, thank you for taking that audition for a silly little shows multiple.
Well, people always thank me, and I have to turn it around and say thank you. I mean, thanks to the fans and their loyalty, I got to spend most of my adult life doing something I absolutely love doing, and very few people have that privilege in life. Most people have to slog into some job on Monday morning, dreading it, and I look forward to Monday morning. Oh, I get to do some more of this.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Then, looking back on your career, is there a particular role or project that stands out to you as especially meaningful or rewarding?
Oh, I guess, the three cartoon shows that we've discussed, along with Spider-Man, that would be those are the four biggies for me. And I'm very proud of what I was able to do in that. And then the one time that I got to be an announcer on the Academy Awards telecast, I mean,
that's a big deal.
It kind of was back then, not so much nowadays, but, things are changing.
Yeah.
But back then that was almost the pinnacle of voiceover work, was the Academy Awards. And I got to do that once, and that was thrilling. And then getting to narrate some episodes of Nova for public television.
Yeah.
I remember watching that show in the early 70s when I was a lowly disc jockey in San Diego. And if somebody had said, someday, young man, you'll narrate a few of these, I would have said, you're out of your flippin' mind. But it ended up happening.
Yeah.
Those are sort of the things that pop into my mind.
Right. And not only cartoon shows and those documentaries. What'd you call them? Document? Yeah. And all that other stuff. But also, you've worked in several video games. Big games, too. Like Mass Effect and Metal Gear Solid. Is there any difference preparing for video game voiceover to, like, cartoon voiceovers?
I don't know. Well, I don't know about preparation, but it's a very different animal. At least I regard it that way. And, animation, you would usually work with the full cast, or at least as many as they can get to show up in one time. Although that's changing now. I guess a lot of people are working solo more these days. But games, I've never worked with another actor. You're always alone. And there's really no storyline because, something is happening and there have to be 5 different lines that will trigger something else to happen. And a lot of the time I'm looking at this and I'm going, what the hell is going on? Why am I saying this? And the person on the other side of the glass says, to be honest, I don't have a clue. So do your best. So you just sort of look at the line and it seems like I would be angry when I say this. So I guess I'll do an angry read.
Yeah. I'm sure, especially with you narrating the codex in the Mass Effect trilogy, just reading about all these different people and aliens and space stuff, without any context. I'm sure that was interesting.
Right. Yeah. I think part of the reason that I got that job is I'm going all the way back to the earlier part of our interview here, where I talked about ripping wire copy off the UPI wire. Mm-hmm. And you never got a chance to look at it. You just started reading it. But I learned how to read it in a very authoritative manner so that it sounded like I had researched this stuff and written it myself. And so I think I was able to read all that stuff and make it sound like I believed that this was real and it was true. And the funny thing is, more recently, I've narrated some stuff for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. And you can find that stuff on YouTube. Just put in JPL, and a bunch of videos will come up. I'm not on every one of them, but I'm on a fair number of them. And some of the guy who produced them was highly amused in the comment section. People were saying, "Hey, isn't this the Mass Effect guy? What the hell's he doing in a real space show?"
I love that.
And so, well, it's all part of my voice-atility, as the late, great Jack Angel called it.
While scrolling through your credits and all that, I noticed that a particular one stood out to me because this game has an intense place in my, like a huge place in my heart because of how much I love the series. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, you are Mayor Domino. Now, I know that's a side character, kind of like for laughs, kind of, but it helps progress the main story. But just seeing another way that you are a part of a franchise that has a special place in my heart. And, I played Final Fantasy VII Remake to death. Did everything 100% completed, got all the achievements and trophies and blah, 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 blah. And now I'm currently playing the sequel to that. And it's just awesome to see that you are in so many things that mean to me. But yeah, it's wonderful. The cartoon credits go on for a long time and like you're still like relevant, and that's awesome, right? And just going on to movies and computer video games, it's phenomenal. And I know you've mentioned in the book that you don't necessarily play video games that you've been on because usually your computer will crash and you're like, nope, never mind, not even gonna deal with it. So
I got burned early on and I never went back.
Understood. So
yeah, that's the frustrating thing. People reference these games and they want me to tell them stories, and I don't really have any stories because I'm working alone. And the thing is, I usually can take care of everything, and not the Mass Effect Codex narrator. That took a lot of different sessions, but usually it's just 1 4-hour session, and I can nail my character and be on my merry way. And then you guys buy the game and you play it obsessively for months on end, and it's drilled into your brain. I've forgotten I even did the thing. And I don't have, I can't even remember what studio I was in, let alone tell you stories. And I'm sure it's very disappointing for people. I should just make stuff up, I guess.
Put any improv skills you have to good use.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of your book, let's talk about Vocal Recall. Vocal Recall provides readers with a behind-the-scenes look at your career in radio and voiceovers and more and everything else. Tell us what inspired you to write the book and what you hope the readers will take away.
Well, I ended up, I had a sort of a traumatic experience in my life, which I won't go through, but I was advised by a psychologist. She said, you're a writer and a communicator. She said, I would advise you to sit down and write sort of a letter to yourself. And that'll be a form of therapy for you. And so I tried that, and I ended up writing 100 pages about this situation. And when it was all over, I thought that wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I mean, if you told me you have to write 100 pages, I never would have started. But suddenly I found myself, my fingers were flying and pages were getting filled up with stuff. And I realized this is kind of fun. And I started writing essentially this memoir or autobiography. Excuse me. And I didn't put pressure on myself. I decided I'll write when I want to write, and if I decide to not go through with this, I'll just junk it. But the more I got into it, the more fun I started to have, and the more ideas I got. Where do I want to go next? What do I want to do a chapter about this. How am I going to set it up, and how's it going to? I used to go on long walks and just write the book in my head, and then I'd run home and type it up as fast as I could before I forgot about it. And to my amazement, I did something that I never my wildest dreams thought I'd be able to do, and that was I wrote a book. And this book, Vocal Recall: A Life in Radio and Voiceovers, is the culmination of that. And I enjoyed doing it, and I've had a pretty good reaction. So if people are interested, you were kind enough to mention it at the top. Maybe we can mention it again now.
Definitely, yeah.
If you want to find out more about it, there's a website. It's cleverly called neilbook, neilbook.com. And all the stuff is there. The book is available on Amazon. Just put in Vocal Recall Neil Ross, and that should take you to it. There's a Kindle version. Mm-hmm. And there's an audio version, which you can either buy at my website, or if you want to deal with Audible, it's available at Audible.
Which you also voiced over.
Yes, a huge audition was held, and actually, I was the only voice talent I could afford. I did it for free, and it was worth every penny. I'm the narrator.
It's a gig of the lifetime.
Yeah. It allowed me to talk about my favorite subject, which is me. And, that was fun.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm pretty sure before we started recording, it is a fantastic read. It's like you're talking to me and joking around with me, but also telling me like fun, serious, and miscellaneous stories about your career and life. Like it feels very personal. This is coming from someone who doesn't really read all that much.
Nobody does anymore.
Yeah, right. Unless you count comics, Yeah. This is double interesting for me because, again, I work in radio, public media. I know it's different, but still it's, in the same vein.
Radio's radio,
Radio's
man.
radio. And of course, because of who you are and what you've worked on. G.I. Joe, Voltron, Transformers, those are the big hitters for me. And when you got to those chapters, first of all, it was awesome. The first half of the book, before you even got to the voiceover stuff, talking about how you got into radio and then your actual radio career. I know you were saying that like you haven't done all that much in terms of of how many places you've actually been, and I understand that you don't feel like it's as very successful. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
let me put it this way.
Yeah.
I got to Los Angeles, which is the second largest radio market in the country, and I survived there 7 years on the air, and I was never fired. Every move I made was because I wanted to make it. Mm-hmm. But I was never a Howard Stern. I was never a Rick Dees. I was never, I reached a certain level, and I couldn't go beyond it for one reason or another. So, I mean, I was a solid professional, I'll say that, but I never really achieved what I thought I had the potential to achieve. Let's put it that way.
Right. But I still thought the stories you shared in that time were fascinating. How vastly different each station would work, and even though it's all the same type of work, but how the environment changes, not just like of each state or city, but like station to station. And I thought, again, fascinating. And I'm glad that you actually had the majority of the book in the radio part of your life. I'm glad, because that's something I am not entirely familiar with, because it's radio all the way, 50 years ago or something. And it's interesting, it's fascinating. And then when you got to the things that I already know, like the shows, like we mentioned, that's like a nice cherry on top. It's brings everything full circle. And then of course, you going on Nova and voicing the Oscars and stuff, and the final chapters of you just thanking everybody, sharing any other little bits of stories that you might think that we find interesting. And I'm telling you, I did. It was hilarious. There's multiple times where I'm like laughing about how you said something or some of your stories. It was phenomenal. And of course I love hearing you talk about meeting other legendary voice actors like Peter Cullen, Frank Welker, Mark Hamill, Jim Cummings, like
Yeah.
amazing. It's an amazing read, and I hope everybody listening gives it a shot. If I reading this correctly, you have a sample on your website for the first 5 chapters.
To be honest with you, I forget. But yeah. I think you can also hear some of it on Audible.
Yeah.
For free.
So it's again, it's fantastic. Some questions I have about you and your book. How do you balance sharing the personal stories while maintaining a focus on your career in the book?
Well, I read a lot of autobiographies, and some of them I found very frustrating because it just turns into one long, then I did this, then I did that. And, and maybe I'm reading the autobiography of an actor, and he says, then I made such and such a movie with Lee Marvin. 2 years later, I know, wait a minute, you worked with Lee Marvin? What was that like, Good God, don't you have one story you can tell? Got drunk with him or whatever? And so I thought, I gotta put in stories. I mean, that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
And so that's what I tried to do. I don't do a whole lot on my personal life. You don't hear about girlfriends much, or my wife. I mean, I mentioned getting married and all of that, and I dedicated the book to her. But it's more my professional life, things that happened in that arena. And I just wanted to pepper it with little stories that I think are much more interesting for the reader.
What was the most rewarding part of writing Vocal Recall, and do you have any plans for future writing projects?
The most rewarding part was actually doing it. I had fun while I did it. I mean, if you had been standing behind me while I wrote it, you would have heard an awful lot of creative language because I'm the worst typist, and I get so frustrated when I do a typo. This book never would have been written if somebody hadn't invented word processing. I mean, I can't tell you in the old days the number of times I want to write a letter to the editor, and I've got a typewriter, and I'm making all these mistakes, and I finally say, "Oh, the hell with it! Somebody else will write in. I just can't do this." But I was going to say there probably won't be any other stories. I thought about fiction, but I don't seem to have that great an imagination to dream up plot lines and twists and things. But I'm helping a friend of mine write his autobiography. And that's a disc jockey. I don't think he'd mind me mentioning it. He's on Sirius, the 60s channel, Shotgun Tom Kelly. Mm-hmm. And he's in the process of writing his autobiography, and I've been helping him with that. So I'm sort of still writing, but
Yeah, it's not yours. I understand what you mean. Yeah. That's amazing. Anything else do you want to say about the book? I've been saying, it's a great read. I have other questions, but you've already answered them, so it's taking some wind from my sail, but that's okay. I read through the entire book within this week to prepare for this episode, and I couldn't put it down. It was hard to read it because, like I said, we were in pledge, and I was constantly on and off live on the board. So every time we were off and I had everything ready and set for the next time, I'm there reading. Everybody else is coming in and out of master control and stuff. Even my general managers and bosses and stuff, and they're just watching me and they're like, "What are you reading?" And then I go into this whole little excited little tangent of explaining what this book is, who you are, what you've done, and they're like, "Oh wow, that's actually pretty cool." So yeah, I couldn't put it down, or at least I didn't want to when I had to, and I had an amazing time. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for writing a book that chronicles a unique part of your life, but also 2-3 industries at the time. It's fantastic.
I was very lucky. I hit the sweet spot of radio, and then I hit the sweet spot of voiceovers, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And I was just very fortunate to be able to do both of those things, and hopefully I tell the tale in an entertaining manner.
Definitely did.
That was my goal.
Yeah. With G.I. Joe and Transformers getting a live-action crossover movie, and a live-action Voltron movie in the works as of this recording. Would you hope to have the chance to make a cameo or maybe even reprise your role in some way in those films?
Oh, sure, if the opportunity came up. I don't know that it's going to, but sure, yeah. I would certainly be open to something like that. I think that might be fun for the older fans.
Definitely.
I thought they might do that on the Transformers movies.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Peter is reprising his role as Optimus Prime, but I think one of the other cast members actually tried to approach the production company about, why don't you put some of us in just, hey, look at that, and then it would be,
Yeah.
It might be fun for the fans, and they said, "Yeah, we don't think so."
It's so bogus. When talking to Gary Chalk about reprising his roles in the latest Transformers movie with Optimus Primal and stuff, he was like, we wishes he would have done it too. And I've seen online that more often than not, fans, at least the older fans, want that too. Like, what if in the new G.I. Joe Transformers crossover movie, you got to voice Shipwreck's parrot?
Well, what I've discovered is when they do a reboot on a show, they want to make it their own. They don't want anything associated with the old show. So it's a tough sell. It makes sense to you and me, but it obviously doesn't make sense to them. And
right,
it's their store. They get to run it the way they want.
Right. Have you seen Voltron: Legendary Defender on Netflix? I know you've seen some of it.
I watched a couple of episodes. I thought they did an excellent job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did you like the direction that they took with the show, with the characters?
Yeah, I think it was sort of true to the original and yet different in its way.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I thought they did a fine job with it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to head into the speed round where I ask you a bunch of random silly little questions just for the heck of it. If you were the final boss in a video game, what would your title be?
I was going to say the Kingpin, but that's already taken.
You can still use the Kingpin. It's fine.
All right, the Kingpin.
Okay. What would your boss theme music be? And you can pick any song from anywhere.
Oh, let's use Rumble.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
If your current favorite show or movie were to be adapted into a musical, what genre of music would you envision for it?
What is my current favorite show? My current favorite show, I just finished it, is Ripley. And they actually make it, the time period of the show is around 1960, I believe, 1960 or 61. And they have a smattering of music from that era. And it works really nicely. And some of those tunes I hadn't heard or thought of in years. And you go, oh, wow, yeah, I remember that. Geez, I don't know. Whatever's appropriate to the visual, I guess.
Okay. If you could have a cameo appearance in any movie or TV show, which one would it be and what role would you play?
That's good. God, I would have loved to have been in any of Clint Eastwood's classic Westerns. The problem is, I remember we were discussing this in a green room somewhere, and I said, it was all voiceover people. You ever wanted to do on camera? Well, kind of, well, no, and this and that. And I said, I must confess, I always wanted to be in a Western. But I'm not the right type. And somebody said, oh, you could be in a Western? I said, you really think so? He said, yeah, you could be the terrified little shopkeeper that Clint Eastwood rescues. I said, well, yeah, that's being in a Western, but it's kind of not part. Somebody else probably needs to do that. But yeah, I would have loved to have had a little tiny part in one of his better Westerns.
Awesome. If you had to guess, what would you say is the song you've listened to the most times in your life?
Wow. What would that be? God. Well, of course, you got to remember, I'm not a typical person. Certain songs that my job insisted I sit through. I probably heard, oh God, what would be one of the ones that just drive me up the wall? The one that I got so sick of and I never want to hear again as long as I live is Get Together by the Youngbloods. Are you familiar with that one at all?
Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together and love one another right now.
And I mean, it's a perfectly acceptable song. It was one of those songs that just stayed on the damn hit parade for months. And that deedle intro, I just said, I never want to hear this again as long as I live. And I'm sure I'll be on my deathbed and you could hover over with the last chance before you go. You want to hear the young? No.
Do you have a favorite album?
Well, quite a few. Probably my all-time favorite group was The Doors, and that first album was just astonishing. To hear that in the bleak summer of 1968 was quite an experience, or 67, whenever it was. But yeah,
and you got to meet them too.
Yes, I did. Yes, that's something we did. It's in the book.
Yep.
I did. One glorious evening, I did get to meet the Doors.
What activities or pursuits most make you lose track of time?
Oh, probably surfing on the net. I suddenly look up and go, I have just pissed away an hour and a half.
Just falling down a rabbit hole?
Yeah. One thing leads you to another. Oh, look at that. There's a cat falling out of a tree. Oh, here's another one falling out of a tree. Let me look at that.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, I studied martial arts for a while. I kind of would get lost in that, and you'd realize, oh, the class is over. I thought it's almost like we just got here. But, yeah.
Okay.
That's about all that's coming to mind.
What would your 14-year-old self think of who you are today?
Oh, that's the $64 question. Wow. Yeah. I don't know. Would he say, wow, look at all the stuff we did or we're going to do, or however it would. Or would he say, really, that's it? That's what we did? You're kidding. Geez, I thought we were going to do more than that. I don't know. I don't know. It's a great question. I would love to meet 14-year-old me, but I can't do it.
Any kind of advice you would love to impart on him?
Yeah. Regardless of what you end up doing, take time to smell the roses. I think I was so ambitious early on that I would be in a beautiful place like Honolulu, and I would look back years later and go, you really didn't take advantage of that experience. You were so damn busy doing radio and wondering why you weren't in Los Angeles yet. And you missed out on some really glorious sights and sounds. And, that really is a true line as you go through life. Take time to appreciate what's going on. And because it's a cynical line I heard some years ago where they said, listen, quit belly aching. In 20 years, you're going to call these the good old days. And it's true. You look back and go, damn, I didn't appreciate what I had going for me back then.
Right.
So.
Well, now you've made it to the end of the show. Now it is time for you to recommend 3 people that you're going to share this episode with and that you think they'll be a good guest for the show and that you think that they'll come onto the show.
Well, definitely good guests for the show. How tough it would be to book them, I don't know. Well, Rob Paulson, I think, is always a sterling guest. I assume you know who he is.
Yep.
And actually, Maurice LaMarche, now that we're talking about Rob, he's another great personality. And Michael Bell has some astonishing stories to tell. Michael was with me in Voltron and G.I. Joe and Transformers, and he would be a good guest to have. Those 3 are popping into my head, but there are others. The phenomenally talented Tress MacNeille, who I haven't had any contact with in a long time, unfortunately, but she would be great if you're looking for a great woman voice actor. So those are the best I can do at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Hopefully we can get them on the show, and it'll be greatly appreciated to have your help with that. Any final thoughts before we end it off?
Well, just repeating again for the West Coast, it ain't what you got, it's what you do with what you got that matters. That would be my final thought.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Like you famously said, all the way back in 1985, 86, whenever the movie came out, you got better things to do than die, and I'm glad this is one of them.
I've got better things to do tonight than die. Yeah. That's a line from the Transformers movie that has, I'm lucky. I have a line, not many actors have a line that's connected with them. But,
Yeah.
Clint has, go ahead, make my day. And, I don't know. Clark Gable has, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And I've got better things to do tonight than die, which was uttered by the character Springer in Transformers the movie. So.
Yep. And what an amazing movie that was, even in hindsight. But again, thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate it. Again, you and your work has meant so much to me, the identity of this entire podcast right here, and to many others across the world. So again, thank you, Neil.
Oh, my pleasure, Jared. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, that's all the time we have for today, guys. If you want to hear more from Neil, be sure to check out his website at neilross.com and consider checking out his book, Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers. You can find that on neilbook.com, on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. Be sure to let us know what you think about this episode somewhere on the internet, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at Razzle Dazzle Show, on TikTok at Razzle_Dazzle_Show, on Blue Sky at RazDaz Show Pod, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Raz_Daz_Pod. Be sure to rate us 5 stars and leave a comment down below. We'll catch you on the next one. Next time on The Razzle Dazzle Show. I do have gifts, and hopefully by now you guys have them, and you have already filmed a little unboxing video for socials and stuff so like people can see. So happy birthday to us. Just, my way of showing my gratitude, celebrating us, right? Celebrating 5 years of this show, of the Razzle Dazzle Show.
5 years old is still crazy. I can't wrap my head around that.
Tune in next week.